Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to walk through several examples for Submittal Form C and also Submittal Form D that are part of the Kansas City, Kansas Community College Student Housing Project, RFQP. Let's dive right in here. Start by reminding everyone of the evaluation criteria and how what's highlighted in green here are critically important because these 60 total points are going to be what we base our shortlisting decision upon for who gets invited to the interviews upcoming. And so Forms C and D, which we will cover in this video, make up 25% out of that 60 points, which is equivalent to about more than 40% of the shortlist decision. So these carry a big weight in moving forward to that next step of the evaluation process. So we're going to start with Submittal Form C. And as a reminder, what we're doing here is we're going to walk through what these forms are, provide a little more detail of the intents behind why the college is asking for each of these forms. And then we'll give some examples because, as mentioned in the initial recording for the Submittal Form overview, this procurement process has been used on more than 3,000 procurements and many, many submissions. So these are all going to be real examples from real projects. And what we've found is that a lot of submissions tend to start looking the same when they come in. And what these examples are intended to show is how to help differentiate, how to make your response look a little different, a little bit more specific to the project and to the needs of the college and their housing facility that we're looking at here. Because that will then translate into additional evaluation points. The more specific you are, the more you're able to differentiate, then the easier it is for the evaluation team to justify providing a higher score. So that's the basis with which we're operating under here. So let's go through a few examples. As a quick reminder, Submittal Forms C1 and C2 both are relating to experience. C1 is at the partner company level, whereas C2 is at the critical project team member level. So as a reminder, 10-page maximum for Submittal Form C1 with all the companies included on your team in whatever combination you prefer to use the 10-page limit on. And then you've got 2 pages each for the 4 critical project team members, provide a brief narrative of roles and responsibilities, but then also get into their resume. And we won't give too many examples here. You all have good information about your portfolios of experience. Just maybe a couple quick tips to chat about. We see a lot of teams that will come forward and their perceived, their perception of the client's concern. Why is the client so interested in the experience of the company and of the team members and so forth? And in this example, the perception is that the client's asking for this information because they're worried about having an inexperienced project team, maybe a project manager or any of the other associated critical project team member roles, because they think that's going to translate into less certain performance. And that's probably a fair assumption. That's fine. But then think about what most folks say in response. Most proposers say, hey, don't worry, it's our best project manager. It's our best project team. We've put together the absolute best. We've got lots of experience. We've got lots of internal quality control processes. We've done this before. Trust us, we will deliver an effective and efficient project. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that type of information. And you need to talk about that type of information and obviously provide a little bit of the where and when of what projects you've seen as a team or as individuals on that team. But I would like to draw your attention to this idea too of how can you use metrics to showcase the results, the outcomes, the positive value that has been added to those projects and clients that you've been participating with in the past. So this is an example from a totally different project type, and that was on purpose. This project type was actually redeveloping a coal fire power plant into a cogeneration facility and expanding capacity. So totally different type of project. But one of the proposers stood out in their experience section because they talked about how one of the objectives that particular client had for the project was to offset some of their CO2 emissions by replacing some of the regular coal-fired plant with natural gas, so hence the cogeneration facility. Now, in addition to walking through their plan and approach and other submittals, one thing they talked about in terms of experience is how they've particularly addressed that system or that component of this project scope in the past and what they are able to achieve. So for a similar client, here's what we were able to do. Here's the output we are able to achieve. Here's the reduction of emissions that we are able to achieve. And then here's how it fit into the broader financial context of the project, that the overall project was a success. And so in this sense, it's not just that, they're saying what most folks could say is, yeah, we've got the experience, we've done a similar type of project before, but it's also, what did they accomplish in that project? What was the end result? So be thinking about those types of things in your experience section. And then you can do that on the individual project team member as well, the member level, I should say. Now, this is not going to be a perfect example because this is more for a construction phase only, but calling out, in this case, a project manager and site superintendent, what they've done in the past, and value that they've delivered, schedule results, project results that they've achieved in the construction phase, and maybe looking at specific and important subcontracted packages, those types of things. So these are just ideas of how you might get to be more metrics driven and showing results and outcomes in the experience section. And so I guess the quick hint here is, yes, you need to have some of the general experience information of projects, when and where, and that's all to be expected, but also be focusing on the results and outcomes that were delivered in those similar projects. It doesn't even have to be just similar projects as a whole. It could also be focused on, you can be calling out things where you've dealt with similar systems or components of the scope. For example, I remember a project where it was a dormitory renovation, particularly the washrooms in the dormitory were being updated, and it was a 5-story tall dormitory. And one of the construction project managers had not had experience in dormitories, but had done multi-story retirement senior living communities, had dealt with similar things, and he focused on, well, here's my related experience with these types of systems themselves, not necessarily in the dorm. So that was, another way to focus on elements of the scope and then focus on the corresponding results that were delivered. So maybe the more open-ended submission is Submittal Form D, where we're asking for, what is your approach and methodology for design and construction? And then what's your approach and methodology for the financial model that you are bringing to the table? And as a reminder of how this all fits together, there's the approach and methodology components here. They're each a 3-page maximum. The design and construction one will be anonymous, and the financial component is not, because it just might be easier that way. And then we'll talk about these other two in the next video. So focusing on the first one here, design and construction overall approach to deliver the scope from a design and construction point of view. Quick reminders, it's a 2-page maximum write-up and then a 1-page for the design and construction schedule. Keep it anonymous, open template. Now, a few things to think about here is, let's go forward. One of the top reasons that we'll see poor or low scoring or maybe average scoring evaluation scores for the submittal is when the 2-page write-up gets really generic, really boilerplate, walks through the basics, it states the obvious. First, we will go through these stages of design, and then we'll move into construction. Of course, there'll be pre-construction services offered, so on and so forth. The client understands that. That's not gonna move the needle too much. It seems very generic, and oftentimes the perception when it's that high level and obvious is that it's not tailored to the specific scope, site, and associated objectives, requirements, and constraints that we have in terms of schedule and budget constraints that have been shared. Obviously here we've asked for the 1-page schedule, so that should be easy to keep it pretty clear and understandable. So kind of a 1-page high level phasing steps, those types of things, that's where you can show the general approach, but within a timing context. And then you've got the remaining 2 pages to provide some information around key approaches. And of course, if it's disorganized, hard to follow, as typos, grammatical errors, that type of, all the obvious things that tend to get picked apart as well. So let's think through. I'm going to do some examples. Again, these are real examples from real past responses and submissions for similar submittals here. So as I go through these, place yourselves in the evaluation team's shoes. So pretend like you are an evaluator for these projects, and just be thinking about who would you rather work with as I go through the examples whenever I do compare and contrast. And then it's really not who would you rather hire. Remember, it's more of this is a pre-shortlist decision. So it's really who would you rather bring forward to an interview stage? Who do you want to spend more time talking to? That's truly what the evaluators are thinking at this step of the evaluation process. So this is a kind of a different type of an example, but hopefully it proves a bit of a point here. This is for a totally different type of project. This was a dining services contract, food services contract for a large university in the United States. And three of the largest providers out there proposed, and here's what each of them said. They all addressed the safety aspect of their approach to deliver dining services on campus. I'm going to read through these and then kind of think through who would you pick if you were the evaluator. So option one, door number one, safeguarding the health and safety of our people and customers is our moral responsibility, essential to the success of our business. We've worked hard to establish safety culture where our people instinctively take individual and collective responsibility for their own safety, that of those around them, and act accordingly. That's option one. Option two, from the food we serve, places we work, and our day-to-day operations, we make sure safety is an every moment, everyday mindset for our employees. We work hard to create a safety culture where all employees can stop any situation in which they feel unsafe. That's option number two. And in your option number three here, health and safety is a global strategic priority for our firm. We're committed to a global health and safety culture, world-class health and safety performance. We know that integrating health and safety into everything we do minimizes risks to people and property. Now, if you're reading through these with me and kind of trying to decide which one you would want to pick, hopefully the trend you're seeing here is they all kind of sound the same. They all hit on the same things. They all talk about safety culture. They talk about how they want it to be a global mindset or a widespread mindset. They want to get it down to the individual level of their employees. That's about all they say. And they all sound about the same. So if you're struggling to pick your favorite, or maybe finding some slight preference to one of these rather than the other, the reality is the substance is the same. The wording's a little bit different. Maybe some of the wording resonates with us a little bit more, but truly the substance is the same. And in that case, what's going to happen in the evaluation process here is these should all get the same exact evaluation score. None of these responses have differentiated themselves from the competition. They've all kind of sold the vision. They've made it sound like they're almost selling a product, like a soft drink. They're selling Coca-Cola or Dial shampoo. And here's how wonderful it will be. It'll be every moment, every day. It'll be a full-on culture, right? And none of them have offered too much difference in substance. So they all get the same score. And that, by the way, is the default position in this evaluation process. All submissions, all interviews, everything that's being evaluated receives the same score as a starting point. That's the default assumption, is if you don't differentiate, you get the same score as everyone else, which obviously doesn't help you win. It's up to you to give differentiating information within the response. So let's talk about that. How do you differentiate? Well, number one, first hint here is don't state the basics, kind of this boilerplate. These are all really mission statements that you could go on their company websites and find. And in fact, I'm sure many of our construction friends who are a part of this effort would have similar safety statements, and that's all well and good. We all have to have those things. But within the context of a specific proposal, doesn't necessarily differentiate. So in order to be sure that you're differentiating yourself, one of the first tips we can give is to focus on project-specific approaches. So that think about the project and kind of get into some of the details. And you know, in this case, the client and in our evaluation team, we understand the basics of the process, right? We don't have to focus on the obvious and kind of narrate through the basics of design and builds. The idea here is we've already asked you for the one-page schedule. That's going to show the basics of the design build process within a time context, within a schedule context. Don't waste the other 2 pages just restating what's already in your schedule. We'd much rather you focus your 2-page written response on details within the project. So, you know, use that to show the details of your approach, how they're different than the norm, how you're focusing on key things within the scope, how you know you can do it in the right way. I'll give you some examples. So here's an approach and methodology example. So this was calling out an important or complex aspect of the project, really more of an important aspect. This was at Harvard University. They were renovating a museum and library, and the way the schedule lined up is the proposers realized that the demolition phase was going to occur during finals week, and that's a big deal at Harvard. I guess it's important to study there. So doing demos during an operating library during finals week, that's kind of a concern. May not make the client super happy, and they may not have realized that this was an implication of the overall schedule requirement. So here's some options of what we're talked about in terms of here's our approach to that phase of the project. So yeah, you can look at our schedule. You can see it lines up with the finals week, but let's talk through kind of what's the right way to approach it. What's our methodology? So here's an option one. Partnering is a key to success on any project. We'll work with the user, work with the client to develop the best strategies that can be implemented to minimize the impact of noise from demolition. Now, the reason I like pointing out this example as a bad example is think about what this really says. What's the solution that's really being offered? There's a few ways that you can interpret it. The best way to interpret this, or I guess the nicest way you can interpret this, is that they don't know, they don't really have a plan, they don't have an approach, they haven't figured out what method they're going to use, and they'll figure it out later if they get the contract. That might be the nicest way I could interpret this response. The more cynical way I can interpret this response is they not only don't have a plan, but they're just going to come to the client and say, hey, client, what do you want me to do? What do you want us to do? And when the client responds to that question, then the client now owns all the risk. And that proposer has not leveraged any of their expertise into how the project is going to be delivered. And that's a problem, because what we're looking for here in a predominantly qualifications-based selection, the vast majority of this selection is purely qualifications and not on that 15% financial component, then we're looking for your qualifications and your expertise. So here was another response that came in on that project. To ensure the client satisfaction, we plan to do demolition during off hours and weekends. We can install rubber sheets on the floors and foam pads around the wall to diminish noise from vibrations. And I do remember they had another sentence that provided some performance metrics and some outcome information that said, hey, we've done this on 8 other projects, and all of those clients seem to like it. We never had a complaint during that demo phase with in-operation facilities. And so they provide a little bit more proof that way in a blind and anonymous fashion. So that's something to think about, right? The hint here, I guess, is don't push it back to the client. Don't ask us what we want you to do. Don't say we'll figure it out later. Showcase that you have the processes to do it the right way. You've thought about the project. You've thought about how this is going to fall within the schedule. You've thought about the right way to approach that particular phase of the work. And you can see how short it was, right? This is 2-3 sentences and then maybe another sentence of proof where they've said, hey, we've done this before, people seem to like it, we haven't had any complaints. Well, great. That's very short. That's very small fraction of your 2 pages that you have. We know it's only 2 pages, but that might be a couple of the key bullet points about how you're going to approach the early stages of the construction process. And I know we don't have a demolition phase in our project for Kansas City, Kansas Community College, but you can get the gist here. Another quick example. This was a design build project to upgrade a coal fire power plant here in this case, similar to the previous example. And they're talking about how they're going to approach the design, because this was a very tight project site as well, and to think about where the footprint was going to go and adjacencies and that type of thing. So how are you going to address some of these things? So here's one of the responses, design build team 1 in this case. Hey, our team understands the complexities that are involved with expanding the capacity of an existing power plant. We've got a highly qualified team. We'll provide a thoughtful approach that considers a wide range of design efficiencies to optimize function, capacity, and layout of the future facility. Basically, how are we going to fit in the additional capacity while also having, this was a big office space too for all the facilities folks at this institution. We've got a proven track record using creative strategies in construction as well to maintain continued operation in the legacy facility, because during construction, you still have to provide power, so that the existing setup could not be shut down, had to be maintained its operations. So that's an okay approach, right? We understand the complexities. Here's what we're going to do in design. Here's what we're going to do in construction. Sounds okay. Maybe it doesn't wow us, but it sounds normal. Well, let's think about it a little bit more. What I'm highlighting here are what I'd consider fluff language. These are not specific plans. That's not a specific approach, not a specific methodology. We understand. Highly qualified, thoughtful, wide range, optimized, proven track record, creative. None of this is specific to, well, what are we actually going to do? What are the strategies and approaches within design? What are the key points within construction that are going to be tough to maintain, and how are we going to do that? Do we have a proven track record of actually doing those specific things and those specific scope elements? How is that documented here? So here is actually the winning response, proposer 2. They said, look, we don't have the right answer now, but we're going to consider 2 main approaches. Approach A We're going to focus our design attention on the main and second levels. So if we can open up the main and second floor facades, we'll give the greatest impact on the north laneway that's existing there. That'll also allow us to reinforce the existing loading dock access points. We would need to do that. We're going to leave the existing upper level punch windows intact because that provides adequate access for the operational uses that have been listed in the scope. And redevelopment of those upper levels with larger openings is going to be not really worth it, not really a good value. So you're not going to gain much benefit there. So that's approach A. Now, another approach that we're going to consider is adding a whole corridor along the face of the facade on the north side. Now, this must be coupled with a relocation of the elevator cores. We've identified this as a concern in their other submittal forms. So you can link this with the other submittal forms, in this case, linking it with submittal form E, the CRISP responses, that there's a concern with the elevator relocation. We might have to do it. But hey, if we can do this, it's going to provide energy efficiency and more efficient room configurations because we're actually adding a corridor. And there's an additional benefit that we can connect these levels to the stairs, which doesn't currently exist. And that'll actually help over here as well. So in this case, again, the question is between the fluffier response here versus the specifics. And they haven't come up with a specific answer yet, right? This is still very early. The design process hasn't begun. But as professionals, they looked at it and said, look, here's the two best ways that we can see to approach this. This is where we would hit the ground running if we were selected. So the hint here is watch out for that fluffier boilerplate type of content and really truly delve into that project specific information. What processes, action steps, approaches, strategies might you take within your approach and methodology? Another quick example. This was a facilities redevelopment project, and or it was a new building project. They talked about the roofing system that's going to be installed and the quality of that roofing system. So that's going to be important. And several of the proposers talked about that. So one of them said, hey, we're bringing an extensive roofing history to the project as part of our team. We'll install the best system for your needs. Don't worry about it. Proposer 2, hey, minimize any concerns or challenges around the roofing system. Our system that we're proposing has been installed on over 400 roofs, got an average age of 18 years. 99% of those roofs don't leak, and 100% of those clients are happy with the product. And then option 3 said, yeah, here's what we're carrying in our roofing system. We're bringing a thermally welded roofing system. It's got a tensile strength of this many PSI, elongation of 300%, tear strength of 312 pounds. Been tested for 10,000 hours and the cold brittleness of minus 30 degrees Celsius. The question here is which one is the best? Which one earns the most evaluation points typically? Well, I mean, proposer 1 probably out because that's basically just saying, we've done some stuff before, trust us, we're good. Whereas the other 2 have offered at least some specific information and talked about the system that they're thinking about, whereas 1 just said, hey, don't worry about it, we'll give you the best. Now, between 2 and 3, though, maybe it's a little bit more difficult. And a lot of times, at least for myself, the kind of the technically oriented brain, the engineering design focused brain, and construction system focused brain, sometimes I can be drawn to the data, the numbers down here. But if you think about it, the numbers down here, these are all inputs. These are all, it's kind of technical details as inputs, whereas proposer 2, one thing I like about this is these are all outputs. These are all results oriented. This is what's actually in terms of value delivered to the client rather than what's contained within the technical details of a specification, which doesn't really speak to me as a client perhaps. And by the way, this is the roofing system that was spec'd down there below. It was one of the more popular roofing systems back in the 90s, and upon thermal cycling a few years in, literally exploded off of the roofs. So even though it has impressive looking technical specification details, it doesn't ultimately speak to the value received by the client in terms of the outcome. So the moral, I guess, or lesson tip of this example is I wouldn't go overly technical on the jargon, and I would try not to focus on that input type of language of things being put in. Instead, think more about the dominant performance information and outcomes and results that would be achieved by your approach and what you are recommending. So there you go. Hopefully that's helpful on the approach and methodology for design and construction. Again, anonymous. You got 2 pages to talk about some of those critical elements, and then also put your 1-page overall schedule in there as well. Next up would be approach methodology for the financial model. And so this is going to be describing the structure of the proposed financial model, not required to be anonymous. It is a 3-page limit. You can see it's an open template, just blank pages here. And the big thing to call your attention to is this being your financial model approach. This should be, back to the broader perspective here, your financial proposals in forms H1 and H2. So that's your submittal forms H1 and H2, which actually provide your indicative financial proposal with some information there. That's to deliver the scope of work as described in the RFQP. It's section 2. So the number of beds that we're asking for, the type of facility that's being asked for in the scope of work, that's what submittal forms H1 and H2 financial proposals should be. The only difference between H1 and H2, as a reminder, H1 is requiring a 30-year term for the project, whereas H2 is allowing any term that you think is best for delivering that said scope for the college. Now, the purpose of doing that and kind of keeping the scope the same there is to make sure that we're having a fair comparison of financial approaches, models, and responses up front. And so what you should be describing here in this approach and methodology form in submittal form D2 is your approach for those options, H1 and H2. You should be walking through how you're going to achieve the college's specified scope within those constraints of a 30-year lease versus a you name it term on the lease, or you call it term on the lease. So I hope that makes sense. You also do have submittal form H3, which is truly the anything goes approach, which you can change scope and anything else really. And that has a 3-page limit by itself that gives you some room for some narrative description. So you can kind of keep that separate into H3, whereas this approach methodology is more for delivering the scope that is published in the RFQP for the college. So hopefully that adds a little bit of clarity there. And also, of course, alternates, more itemized alternates to our scope would go into submittal form F, which is the scope alternatives. So that stays separate as well. This should really be to deliver the scope that was put into the RFQP by the college. So hopefully that helps orient that. I won't provide too many examples here. The idea though is describe major elements and variables, any known quantities, values, rates, those types of things, and explain why that's the best financial approach for the college to achieve their scope. So, you know, why is that beneficial to achieve the scope if the scope's basically the same that's being received by the client, since you're proposing to the scope specified in the RFQP? Then what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is delivering the best value to the students, right? We're looking for the most affordable possible cost to the students, hopefully within the budgeted amount or less. That's really the goal of the project. And then you can utilize submittal form F, which is the scope alternatives, to itemize other ideas as well to make changes to that scope to improve or enhance the value to the students. So there you go. That's submittal forms C and D. Hopefully those examples are helpful. Thank you for watching, and jump over to the other video if you haven't already for submittal forms E and F and the associated examples there. Thanks again for watching.